Thank you, Mike, and what a privilege to be with you all this morning. Thank you for the great opportunity to be with you and to have enjoyed last night's celebration. The dinner was brilliant. It was fantastic to gather and to eat and meet, for me, a great group of people. So thank you to the ministers, mayors, distinguished guests. It's an absolute honour to be with you all today. And I'm excited to be able to share some statistics with you, and we'll be diving right into some great data that we've got today. And we're really looking at how do we understand the future of regional South Australia. And so my title is Director of Solutions at McCrindle, and I've been in the role for 8 years at McCrindle, and I was working next to my daughter. I'm from Sydney, and during lockdowns I was sitting next to my 7-year-old daughter at the time, and she summed up my job description in 9 words. She said, type, chat, chat, blah, blah, blah. So I think our young generation are in good shape. They're going to be able to summarise things succinctly, and let alone with the help of AI. But today we're really looking at how do we explore the insights with the real focus on getting better outcomes. I know you've come here today looking for improvements for your region, for your area, helping to lift in so many different areas. And I've had a bit of a glimpse at the draft blueprint that's been mentioned as well. And congratulations on your fantastic work across all the leadership to really pull together what will be a great approach for the unique needs of each area. And so today I'll be helping really share social insights. I'm a social researcher, and that means we get to understand the curiosities of the Australian mind. It's a fascinating job running surveys, doing focus groups, looking at the demographic data, all with the focus on the future. And when I say the future, what we're really talking about today is a range of different topics. So I'm going to introduce you to the 6 generations and then share the 7 factors shaping the regions, and there's a few of them on the screen here, but we'll guide you through that. And I've been privileged to work with Mark McCrindle, who's founded the company McCrindle, and we really get to explore the trends shaping the future. And Mark's done a great podcast on that very topic, and a few, I guess, key action points even for you to think like a futurist, to be a futurist as well. I would encourage you as you get into the data today to be looking for those trends. And a couple of quick tips would be to think tides, not waves. A wave might look exciting, but the rising tide or the declining tide is what really matters. We need to sometimes look back to look forwards, as well as to focus on signals, and just getting those little faint connections sometimes can be the start of something that is going to have a really strong future. So I hope today, as we look at the trends, not just shaping over the recent years, but even trends of 2023 at the start of the year, we get together and think through what are the trends shaping this year, this unique period of history. And we had the second trend out of the 8 was population growing pains as a country. We've had some great growth in our cap cities over recent years, and now as people have seen the success of the regions and experiencing some of the pains of growth in those regions as well, and yet there's still probably a greater appetite for more growth in regions. And so there are other trends that we'll explore today from the trends of the year, like humanitae, this connection between people and the advancing artificial intelligence and the opportunities that presents. And I guess for me it's a real passion that I just love talking about strategy. How do we make the best out of what we've got to make the most for the future? And I love reading great books like this, Lords of Strategy. It's not a rip-off of Lord of the Rings. It's an actual real book, The Lords of Strategy, about that great kind of consulting approach that's emerged from the US. But I've also read great strategy books as a dad with 3 kids, like this one. Have you read this one? The Very Hungry Caterpillar, something that started small but had a big appetite. Had a bit of a mixed diet, 5 days pretty good, but then on that last day went a bit wild and crazy. If you remember the story, it went and ate everything. That's my kind of diet. And then on the 7th day, it enters the cocoon, and it spends some time in a cocoon before emerging. Very, very different. It wasn't just big, it was beautiful, and it took off and took flight. This hungry caterpillar became a beautiful butterfly. And I think it's a great little metaphor that this time in the little cocoon today, our little gathering, is a chance to reflect. How do we plan for a future that will be very different to the past? And really, in the Lords of Strategy, Michael E. Porter, he says the number one purpose of strategy is alignment. And so we want to help you today with the data to consider the options. What's available for you that you can utilise? What are the trends you can respond to, that you can find opportunities in to see your population grow and to see your city and towns prosper? And so how does a town or a city grow its population? Well, I've got the simplistic 6 here that I'll just share that are very brief in their kind of focus. You can have more births, and that might be an interest for some of the younger people in the room. I've got 3 and that'll do me. Thank you very much. We could live longer. We can fight off death and hope to live longer. That will see a town maintain its population growth. Secondly, we could attract Australians. This is net interstate migration will be the official term. Or we can retain locals. And it was great to hear after 4 decades of younger South Australians moving interstate that tide has turned. It's a remarkable thing. And I am a part of that. My parents were both born in Adelaide, grew up in Henley Beach and Glenelg area and holidayed. I met someone yesterday, a gentleman who's from the Eyre Peninsula region, and my grandfather was holidaying at Streaky Bay, catching incredible fish, and the slides that I grew up watching when we would come home to Adelaide and see these photos were absolutely incredible. So it's on my list of journeys to explore as a part of my journey, and a real treat to actually come back to South Australia as well to be with incredible people. I always love the opportunity. So we can attract Australians or retain locals, or on the global landscape we can attract global audiences or retain locals as well. And so the growth of a city, the growth of a town has those simplistic 6. But let's look at the 6 generations now, because at McCrindle we always see the world through the population, and today in our population we have 6 generations. I mentioned my grandfather, who would have been in that builders cohort, aged 78 plus. There are 1.4 million builders in Australia, and on your tables, I'll just get you to have a look on your table right now. You should have in front of you a population map, an infographic. It's dense with data, it's full of insight, and hopefully a good conversation starter if you've got an upcoming team meeting. These can be brilliant as a way of getting people up to date with the latest trends. And so on the front is the population by states. It's got the top 30 cities there, and South Australia's got 1 in the top 30. I know there's ambitions there to see that change. But on the reverse, you'll also see those 6 generations, and you've got the age ranges, you've got the percentage of workforce, as well as the population today. And so we'll kind of cast a bit of a vision for each of these generations just for the next few minutes, with really, I guess, the focus that we want to help you understand the generations, because when we say attract residents, well, each generation is going to have a different mindset, a different driver, a different hope, a different fear. And we just recently did a survey with 2,000 Australians looking at some of these kind of more social trends about what drives Australians' behaviour. And so let's dive right into the first generation in the survey. We didn't find too many 78 plus were ready to take the survey, but in the baby boomer cohort, there are over 5 million baby boomers, as you'll see on your infographic. And out of those 5 million baby boomers, we've got on the slides here, and I'm aware that might be quite small if you're up the back. I can't read it from up the front, so don't stress. You will get these slides sent to you. But what I do want to highlight is that we've got information on there for you to understand what are their hopes, what are their fears, what were the kind of iconic movies, what are those leadership styles that each generation resonates with? What are those kind of communication methods as well? So what do they use to learn new skills? And so let me just highlight one of the key areas from the baby boomers, which was their top fears. Number 1, and more than 1 in 2 were identifying they won't have enough money to live comfortably. For a generation that have worked hard, saved hard, that's still a challenge in these rising times of inflation. And secondly, the top fear was suffering a long-term illness. And thirdly, and I love this, almost 1 in 5 saying none. I don't have any fears or worries. I think that captures the baby boomer ethos very well, that they're living free, living bold, and not afraid of anything. They've seen it all and got a great spirit to them. Then for our Gen X, Generation X, a label that's almost saying, don't define me, don't put me in a box. This is a generation that I would call are in their sandwich years. They're caring up for ageing parents and also caring for probably a teenage cohort. So if you're Gen X in the room, you absolutely have my respect. They're 2 challenging cohorts to look after. You're probably having to check your phone in the middle of today going, is anything happening? Did they get home, or should they be at home? Well, you've probably got a lot of pressure on you. And in those middle kind of career peak management kind of years, it's a real pressure point for life, and so a lot of stress but also a lot of joy in the Gen X cohort. And interestingly for them, the top fear though, as their Gen X are on the screen, the top fear for Gen X was that they also wouldn't have enough money to live comfortably. Secondly, that long-term illness was on there. And thirdly, it was about not reaching their full potential. So there's still that ambition, that drive for our Gen X cohort. As we go down the generations, we can see Gen Y, and I'm a part of this generation that probably felt like the young generation, but we're almost in, and some are in our 40s of Gen Ys. It's the generation also known as the millennials, and Generation Y have copped a fair bit over the years, and for some good reason, where we've maybe enjoyed cafes and sipping lattes rather than starting lawnmowers and getting out there and doing the hard jobs and saving up the money that we need to buy homes. But this is a generation that have a different top hope. Their top hope is really for Gen Y, it's around looking to have financial freedom and independence. And I'm aware there's so much on there, you might want to spend half an hour just looking at each one of these, but you'll get these for later on. For Gen Y, their top hope is to have financial freedom and independence, as well as to travel and see the world. And I think that's part of why we sometimes cop a bit of a rap. Where's the ability to be planted and to actually get things built and established? It's a generation with a different value set. And so you can imagine that as global borders impacted this generation, that really kind of hit a core value. It was quite a challenging time. And thirdly, their top hope is to pursue interests and hobbies. So a generation that is very aspirational in their desires. Now for Generation Z, coming after Generation Y, this is a generation that I think in some ways, for every trend there's a counter trend. This is a generation that has a little bit more of a grounding and almost a bit more of a long-term and foresight to them compared to Gen Y. For Gen Z's, their top hope, and I'll just read this one, I haven't got it on a big slide, but their top hope is to own a home. It's not what Gen Y have as their top hope. This is an interesting cohort. So for Gen Z, their top fear, though, is that they also won't have enough money to live comfortably. Can you notice a theme across a few of the generations? For them, their fear, though, is that they won't be able to ever be able to buy a home, as well as being stuck in a job they don't enjoy or find fulfillment in. Now, at McCrindle, we love looking ahead, and when Mark McCrindle wrote a book on the three generations, the X, the Y, and the Zs, he noticed there was no label out there for the next generation. And so back in the early noughties, he came up with a good method to name a generation. He did a survey, asked 1,000 Australians, what do you think we should call this generation? And all these different ideas came through. But as he did the research and looked at the analysis, he decided to go with the Greek alphabet to really start something new as an almost appropriate metaphor. You might know that the Greek alphabet got used for things like naming hurricanes or even COVID strains. I'm sure that Generation Alpha will give their own meaning to this and not relate back to those connotations, but Generation Alpha are a really unique generation. Any parents or grandparents in the room would notice they're such a digitally native generation. This is a generation born since 2010, which is the year the iPad was invented. So they are screenagers from birth. And my kids, they've always got their fingers on the glass. I grew up being told, Geoff, keep your fingers off the glass. I was keeping it off the sliding doors. My generation, or certainly a lean-back generation when we would watch TV. We'd try and get in mum or dad or grandma and grandpa's recliner and lean back, whereas a Gen Alpha approach is to lean forward, and that neck, you can appreciate the posture challenge that presents. But for Generation Alpha, they are going to be the largest generation ever. They will be the most globally connected. They will be the most formally educated. For Gen Zs, it's 1 in 2 that has a tertiary degree, and that's up from 1 in 3 for Gen Y or 1 in 4 for Gen X. So this increasingly educated generation will also be the most materially endowed. They will be the most technologically supplied, as well as the most influential, with all of that resource intelligence, digital sophistication, global connection. This will be a really remarkable generation to watch. And they will live to the next turn of the century. It's quite incredible to think, if you're a parent or a grandparent, the children that you're investing into today will live to the 2100s with their life expectancy into the mid-80s. So amazing, the investments that we make today, that long-term return that we will see on those investments into the infrastructure and into the significant people that will utilise those into the future. Now, as we think about the generations, I hope that just sort of sets the terrain of what I'm going to share about for the next little part is these 7 factors shaping the regions. Now, as a demographer, I didn't have too many thoughts about what should be the first one. I thought absolutely it's going to be population growth. And demographics is really the study of the population, to see the subcultures within it. It's all about seeing those segments so that you can identify opportunities. And as demographers, we lead pretty exciting lives. We get excited when the census results come out, and for us that's the day in the office when we get cake. So you might have those significant moments in your workplace when all of a sudden there's a cake brought out. For us, that's on census results day, and you wouldn't guess it, but we get our lead analyst to cut up that into a nice pie chart as well, just to really round out that joke. So it's a lot of fun being in that space when we're looking at the data. And where are we today as a population? Well, in 2023, our national population is at 26.5 million. And as we look to the future, we will reach 29 million by 2030. And within 3 decades, we will reach 40 million people. And so just to put some context around that, that's 23 million people in the next 27 years. And that means we're going to need to build as a nation an additional 5 million homes. And so we're at a point at the moment where we're really in a housing crisis and doing everything we can to unlock housing supply to ease a shortage. And yet, if we can see not just a wave of a bit of growth that we'll talk about in just a second, but this rising tide of growth, I think we're absolutely on the start of a great opportunity. And I'll talk a little bit more about the opportunity in just a moment. But let's just cast our eyes even to the capital cities, if we can, just for a moment, just to see where that growth is right now. And the largest city at the moment is Sydney. However, over this next decade ahead, Melbourne is predicted to outstrip Sydney in its growth and take that latest gold medal in population growth. And that's been a bit of a journey over the centuries in Australia, as Melbourne's been faster during the gold rush, and then Sydney kind of came in and took it over. But now, while Sydney's in front, Melbourne is growing very well. Now, just to, remind you, you're probably very familiar that the ABS does more than just the census every 5 years. There's a lot of analysis of different topics, but every quarter there's a new demographic update, and it was very nicely timed that they ran their analysis so that we could have it here for today. But last week that came out on the 14th, and I'm that guy that's subscribed to the ABS and gets excited at 11:55 a.m. when their often daily emails come through with what's the new data, what's come out today, and it might be crime data, health data, transport data, real estate prices, or the once a quarter population update. And so for me, I'm in a bit of a Seinfeld phase at the moment, so I have got a little bit of excitement from watching Seinfeld. I'm up to season 6. I did just miss it growing up. I'm not sure what happened as a Gen Y. I was in Friends, but I just missed Seinfeld. So I feel like I'm getting a whole lot of these references that I've missed as a 38-year-old that would have been helpful over the last few decades. Now, when this latest demographic data came out, one of the real stories that I really see at the moment is that this housing crisis, I wrote an article and was fortunate to get onto the Today Show in Sydney, talking about how housing is the problem, but what's the solution? If continuing to just build more houses would solve it, it's almost like a family that's got a 2-bedroom home and they've added a 3rd bedroom and a 4th bedroom and now a 5th bedroom, a 6th bedroom. You need to keep adding bathrooms, living area, extra large laundry as that house grows. And I think for us, I really see Australia is at a point where we've got great cities, but we need to build new cities. We need to expand existing towns and see that opportunity, because the latest growth came in at 2.2% annual growth, whereas between the intercensal period, I don't use that word too often, but between 2016 to 2021, we grew at 8.6%, 2 million increase over that 5-year period, but we grew at 2.2% up to March 2023, and that was a growth of 560,000 people in that 12-month period. We are certainly in a period of growth, and you might be thinking, well, what sort of growth was that? Was that out of the natural increase? Well, a little bit of it was, 108,000. And so every year there's around 300,000 new births, and when you minus deaths, we are continuing to grow through natural increase, but it was 454,000 through net overseas migration. And that is nearly at record levels in terms of national population growth, but it is absolutely at record levels when it comes to net overseas migration. If we look back over the last 150 years, you can see there's just been a couple of dips going under the line.
I'm having some trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
I know what that feels like. I've had trouble with my connection too. I think Australia's having trouble with its connection in terms of this reconciliation. How do we grow sustainably? And while the pandemic really did come as an unexpected pause on net overseas migration, and we were keen to keep construction going. It's certainly been a challenging time to provide the housing, and we'll come to some of those needs in a moment. But in terms of net overseas migration, you can see there the kind of larger numbers there are 300,000, and so we're right up over that at the moment. And so part of the growth has been mentioned through natural increase. Now, total fertility rates have continued to decline historically, sort of since the 70s. And while there was an extra dip during lockdowns, I thought it might rise as people had a bit more time on their hands, but certainly I think those concerns were a bit more pressing. It did rise slightly after sort of the lockdown years eased, but I think what we're going to see is that total fertility rate continuing to stay low unless there is some major adjustment. We've got cost of living pressures and certainly those challenges making it hard for young families. So the total fertility rate was at its highest in the 1961s, now down to quite low numbers at 1.6 to 1.7. So I think there is a good conversation to be had around that as a nation. As we continue to look to fix supply shortages, I know increasing birth rates isn't the immediate fix that we might need as a pressing issue, but how do we explore that as a future strategy, and certainly I think as an area, something relevant I think for South Australia. Now, as I mentioned, our population is at 26.5 million. Where did that growth land though? What was the story in terms of where the fastest growth happened? And proportionally, we could see that in this last 12 months, it was actually WA that grew the fastest. Quite a surprising story there in some ways. And that growth was 78,000 people for WA. South Australia, you can see, had 29,000. However, the largest was down in Victoria, taking the gold medal off Queensland, which has had it for the last little while. Queensland's had the triple green lights of population growth, growing through natural increase, internal migration and net overseas migration. And now that gold medal goes back down to Victoria. So what does that look like for Adelaide? And we did produce an infographic for the area of Adelaide and the population slowly, steadily rising. And as a state, the population has been steadily rising. And the latest projections that have just come out indicate by 2051, you'll be reaching 2.33 million with sort of that mid-range forecast, but the high range is up to 2.53 million. And so you can sort of see those ranges there, using a few different assumptions to explore those different possibilities. And I really think this is, if I've seen anything over my time at McCrindle, is that often we've had predictions of growth, and there are factors beyond our control that can stop or accelerate the growth. And so it's really important that we have good long-term projections, but we've got to seize opportunities when we can. Now, this growth for the rest of South Australia is more modest, the 0.33 million growth by 2051. And when you look at where that is even going to be received within sort of South Australia, Yorke Peninsula is leading at the top, and Mount Gambier in second there with that largest growth over these next couple of decades ahead. So I'm sure you'll be familiar with some of this new data that's just come out. I'm not going to spend too long on it, but I encourage you, if you haven't yet, dive into that. There will be updates, I believe, coming in October with more LGA-based projections as well. That might be more interest as well. Now, to understand this context, I also thought it would be helpful, and you may be very familiar with the story of the age challenge and opportunity that is present for South Australia, particularly regional South Australia. When we look at the median age by cap cities, Adelaide does have the oldest median age, just ahead of Hobart. But when we look by rest of states, South Australia is clearly the leader. Now, how does that play into your story? How do you unlock the opportunity in that? I think it's a great discussion to have. Where do you see that opportunity with an ageing population? What are the opportunities? And we'll come to that in just a moment when we talk about the life stage and wealth that's been accrued over that journey. But let's just dive in, I guess, next into the second trend area, which we call lifestyle locations. And there's a number of cities across Australia that were growing faster than their capital city, kind of sister city, before lockdowns happened. We had Wollongong south of Sydney growing faster than Sydney. We had Geelong next to Melbourne growing faster, the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast growing faster than Brisbane. Australians are on the lookout for a bargain. They love affordability, and they are faced with an incredible challenge when it comes to affordability. We have an infographic called The Fading Great Australian Dream, which looks at the house price from 40 years ago compared to now and what that ratio is between the two. So in Sydney back then, the house price was $78,000, today over $1 million, and that's a 13 times equivalent. For Melbourne back then it was $44,000, today over $900,000. For Brisbane $640,000, and back then just $45,000, a 7 times differential. And coming to Adelaide it was over $543,000 back in 2021 when we ran this analysis at a 6 times differential. And just to set some global context, anything over 5 is severely unaffordable. It's as high as the scale goes. It goes from 0 to 5, and if you're over 5 plus, severely unaffordable. And so Australians living in our cap cities are faced with a great challenge to find affordability in their location. And so part of the study we did in 2021 as a part of a research paper we did called Australia Towards 2031 was we asked, well, who's open to moving to the regions? And we found that 60% of Australians who don't currently live in the regions have considered moving to a regional area. I know this was during those lockdown years, so just to recast you back to that 2021 period as we went into the second lockdown, East Coast particularly, this opportunity to find a new lifestyle, to look for that slower pace of life, look for that green living area where we can find local community was a key part of how we saw society. So the second factor that is key for lifestyle locations is their livability. And so it would have been crazy not to ask, well, what are people looking for in a regional area? What are the benefits of living in a regional area? And so this list, I think, is absolutely brilliant. It's peace and quiet is top of the list. A simpler lifestyle. Affordability makes that list. Less traffic and commute time. As a Sydney person, I read a stat that says we spend more time in commute than we get on annual leave. And that just, I think I lost a few more hairs when I read that stat. That was a devastating one to see. The beautiful landscapes, the proximity to nature, and the ability for that detached dwelling as opposed to living in an apartment or a townhouse is the bottom one on the list there. So we have affordability, livability, and thirdly, employability. And in a beautiful agricultural area, it's incredible to see the jobs and the produce, and we enjoyed that last night. But it's also important that I think as we asked Australians who don't live in regions, if they wanted to move to a region, well, do you want to take your city job with you? We are in a knowledge economy, a service industry, and so 42% of people were actually interested to take their city job with them but move to the regions. And I think that's one of the great opportunities we have seen in these last few years for the regions. Now, in terms of the economic conditions, this plays a part in the story as well. We have from the census the household income for each of the states, and it was Canberra, the ACT, that has the highest household income. For South Australia, you can see there at 75,000 with 21% growth over that last 5-year period for the South Australian household income. For the rest of South Australia, that's at 61,000 for that household income. And what do we spend a lot of our money on? We spend it on our homes. And what's the national home ownership rates? Well, currently 31% of Australians own their home outright. If we go back 2 decades, that was up at 40%. So there's fewer of us owning our homes outright. There's just over a third that have a mortgage with their home, as well as almost a third that have rent as their lifestyle, maybe for forced or choice reasons, are in the rental market. Now, for the rest of South Australia, though, it's interesting to see it's almost 40% that own their home outright. It's a great story, I think, for one of the advantages and benefits of great lifestyle, great affordability, and great employment as well. Now, with the ageing population, I mentioned there's an advantage here, and let's have a quick look at the generational wealth transfer that's happening over these next couple of years. We've got a $6.2 trillion wealth transfer that's going to occur in Australia over the next 2 decades. And where does that come from? Well, let's kind of cut the data by the generations. As we look at in that royal blue, the top number is the annual average household income. So it's not individual income, this is household income. For those aged 25 to 34, it's the young Gen Ys. And the bottom sort of number in that grey box, 353,000, is their net household wealth. So when you have your assets minus your debts, that's the kind of the kitty, the equity they're sitting on. And as we go up the generations, as we go up by decade, you can see that wealth almost doubling by decade. It's that eighth wonder of the world, compound interest. You can see that household income rising up through the generations. and that income rising, but then starting to just taper off into those later working years, but that wealth continuing to grow as people have worked hard, paid down debt, saved, and had 3 decades of good economic conditions for baby boomers prior to the recent recession. And into those final years, you can see naturally the income tapering right off, and appropriately people enjoying and spending down that hard-earned retirement savings. So it really sets the context, I think, for an area to understand that the generational wealth that's built up is a part of the story. There is investment opportunity and generations. We've done a few different studies around what role grandparents are now playing when it comes to things like education or family holidays, as younger generations are feeling the pinch with housing affordability, and older generations who've worked hard, who've saved hard, who didn't have it easy and interest rates were high. I do absolutely understand. I think this really is an interesting time as we consider the economic conditions and how that plays to your advantage if it can be found. The fourth area is the changing world of work. Now, interesting to look across the room today. I can't help but notice what generations are in a room, and I don't know your age, but I can tell from the data that at the moment, 2/3 of the workforce, those middle two categories there, 2/3 of the workforce in Australia are Gen Ys and Gen Xs. We've got about 1 in 5 that are baby boomers, and at the moment, about 1 in 5 that are Gen Z as well. But as we look ahead, the 5-year windows, we're actually going to see a shift in less than a decade to 2/3 of the workforce being Gen Zs and Gen Y. As our baby boomers who've worked hard for decades and decades start to enter those retirement years, we're going to see even Gen Alpha in the workforce in less than a decade. They're already 13 years old. Won't be long till some Gen Alphas will be in the room at conferences like this in half a dozen years or so. And there are really, I think, going to be, let alone Gen Alpha. We've got Gen Zs coming in, and we may even have Gen Zs amongst us here today. It's an exciting time. If we've got these great digital natives in the room, Gen Zs do bring a lot to the workplace. And when we look to the changing world of work, where we work, as has been discussed already, this 3-letter acronym, we call it the biggest transformation to work in a century, the work from anywhere, the work from home trend. And we believe this is absolutely here to stay. We surveyed Australians to ask, well, what's the mix in terms of the location? Where do people want to work when it comes to their job? And just 14% of Australians want to work from home all the time. There's a 62% majority that say they want a hybrid approach where they want to be in the office and working from home. It's interesting that a quarter still want to just be in the office full time. And that's an interesting mix as well of both younger and older generations that want to be in the office. I think it's people in the middle in those family forming years that are saying, I just love a day at home. I can just get a little bit of help and get a little bit of a leg up on some of those home chores. And there is an ABS study on the time usage spent, and we know that the Gen X women are doing the most paid and unpaid work in the home. Men are not keeping up, and so there is data on that. So I think it's a great opportunity as we work from home just that little bit. And if you think, is that going to change with young generations who want to be kind of in the office? Well, we surveyed the emerging workers, and nationally it's 62% of today's workers want that hybrid approach to work, but it's 82% for young Gen Z workers that want a mix of working in the office and working from home. And there are absolutely benefits to both. As we mentioned, that work-life balance, flexibility, deep thinking, as well as the benefits of being in the office. It's a relational advantage, isn't it, of strength with your colleagues. There's something about having time shoulder to shoulder in the trenches, getting things done, problem solving, as well as time with your leaders. It's hard to interpret the tone of an email. I'm waiting for the app that can help me get that. I know there's emojis, but they just don't cut it. And it seems a bit weird to send emojis in work emails, doesn't it? But there's certainly that collaborative benefit as well of being in the office. And that's why we run a great event like this, as the events team have done. So these are great moments to be together, to be in person, to ask the questions that you might not want to ask on a Zoom meeting in front of everyone. You can grab someone by the side and have a good conversation. So this hybrid approach is here to stay, and certainly an opportunity for a city, an area like South Australia with a city like Adelaide. And even just on the infographic, you can see that Adelaide is the only city out of the top 30 And to really, I guess, seize the opportunity in that is that we've got some incredible locations within that sort of, and one of the key phrases that came up a lot in COVID was this peri-urban fringe, as people started to realise we could live near the wineries and go into the office a couple of days a week. This, as East Coast, people from South Australia, this became a real kind of eye-opening moment. People were re-evaluating their life priorities. As an East Coast resident, we were faced with an 11 a.m. daily update on mortality death numbers. It made you slow down. It made you think. I mean, it didn't make you slow down. You had to slow down. You were forced to slow down. So we were asking those deep questions of, what do I want out of life? What pace of life do I want to run at for the next, even just a couple of years or the decade ahead? And so not only is hybrid, I think, the best of both worlds, but I think for peri-urban areas, this is a great advantage as you've got that proximity to a cap city and some of those city jobs that maybe can move to the region, if not 100% of the time, at least in that hybrid approach. So that's certainly one of the, it's probably a well-known fact, but it's also, I think, worth emphasising. There is data to say that that's going to continue to accelerate into the future. But it was interesting to see Zoom. Did you hear about this? Zoom have started asking their remote workforce to at least come back into the office a little bit. I thought, no, okay, that's interesting. There is something for the office, isn't there? It's not the death of the city. It's not the death of the workplace, but it's a change. And that's where we see it's that once in 100-year advancement that's going to redesign the office. We'll still need that deep thinking place at the office, but we're also looking for that in our homes. And I don't know about your study, but study was where you used to put your laundry when you didn't want your guests to see it. That was what we used our study for. It's where you'd put the 2 or 3 loads of laundry and you think, quick, they're coming, get it in there, hide it away. You never did anything in the study, never did any work in the study. It was that extra room if you could afford it. But now I think that study has become a great place, and they're quite sophisticated at the moment, aren't they? That tech setup that you need to run those meetings with a nice background and all the lighting or AV, it's a real master of design. I think creating that, not just for one worker in the home, but how do you create a study where you've got multi-generations or people doing lifelong learning? It might be your kids looking at doing that course online, or adults doing education, or it's that work meeting, and that's flexible. It needs to be used 24/7 almost, doesn't it, that study? It's not just the 9 to 5 room. So it's a real different approach to that space. Let's keep moving though on to a part of, I guess, this hybrid approach is that as we think about the young generation and the digital integration of life, we asked young Gen Zs, how quickly do they check their phone in the morning? And we asked, within 3 minutes, do you check your device when you wake up in the morning? We found that 75% of Gen Z do that, and I certainly do that as well. I'm checking checking the weather, I'm doing a bit of reading, I'm checking what's happened in my bank account. Did I get hacked overnight? Is there money still in there for today? It's just part of my routine, but I might be a little bit odd in that way. But checking our devices at the start of the day, and it might even be not just a phone, but we're connected in so many ways. And in 2017, there was a stat from Cisco that said there will be 7 devices per person on the planet by 2020. 7 devices per person. And if you do your quick count, I've got 3 within kind of a 20 centimetre radius up here, let alone my home laptop, home iPad, home connected we're surrounded by devices, aren't we? And the way we use our devices is changing as well. We now have shifted, I still use Google, but for a younger generation, instead of looking up information on Google, you might know that they're using YouTube more as a search engine than Google. Why would I want to read an article when I can watch the video? It's that hard work of reading or just receiving that information through video, and let alone when you add in TikTok as well. That's that short form content that's a little bit entertaining, and certainly was quite a surprise in one of our studies. We found that TikTok is the third highest place for Gen Zs to learn life skills. Parents are still in there, but it's ahead of teachers. So TikTok has a great educational angle and opportunity for a young generation. So it's certainly a little bit amusing. And I think as an organisation, you might be thinking, does that mean we need to get a TikTok account? I'm not ready to dance in front of that. That's okay. Do the conversations. Have a think through what's your strategy? What's the generation you're trying to reach? What's the audience you're trying to engage with? And what's the platform that's going to most help you effectively engage with it? And who is going to be most effective at engaging them within your grasp and your power? Now, in terms of work as well, another key shift that's occurring is the real driver of why we work. The key desires for a young generation, the number one desire in a career is to have purpose and meaning in their work. You can see the rest of the responses have things like core values in second place, or a strong community in the office, or it's that positive impact in the world around them in fourth, or flexibility in fifth. There is remuneration, and it is certainly an employee's market, but it's a different desire for work for a younger generation. And the context of work and the tools we use at work are very different as well at the moment. As I mentioned earlier, we have a trend for 2023 called HumanitAI, and it's this interactions of humans and artificial intelligence, which is really about finding the future. And just very amusing moment happened in the office this week at McCrindle. We had a team member leaving, one of our data scientists, and so it was only appropriate for one of the people who's helped us learn a lot about artificial intelligence. We asked artificial intelligence to write his farewell song and sing it and produce a whole song for him. And we sat back and laughed our tummies out. It was so good just seeing an AI bot write, produce and record a song. I just thought, this is a strange world we live in, but this is it. And it was actually probably one of the best farewells because it was so silly and fun all at the same time. It was very sentimental for him. I'm sure he's going to listen to his own song over and over again. But this era of ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is just a part of this digital transformation that's occurring in society. It's an era with HumanitAI, more than just ChatGPT, but we're in a 5G era. We've got the metaverse at our fingertips, the virtual reality, as well as augmented reality. We've got new technologies when it comes to finance, AI, the Internet of Things, these connected devices, as well as cloud computing. This era of technological advancement is crucial, and this was all in here before we knew NBN was sponsoring this segment, but this is a crucial plug to say how important it is. I'm happy to do that for NBN. This is absolutely why we need to have great connectivity, this digital infrastructure, and really building cities from the internet up as we look to the future. Now, even though it is a digital future, the most valuable skills will still be distinctly human characteristics. We found that for 70% of Australian workers, the office is where they actually experience the most community. Meaningful connection is happening in the corridors around the workplace water tank. It's interesting that, and we found this great summary from our book Work Wellbeing, which says, to some, work is simply a job, but to many more, it's a lifeline to social interaction, purpose, and a place of belonging. We've got a couple more trends to land this. The fifth one is around the cultural diversity that is changing Australia's future. And even just roll your shoulders just for a moment before I launch into this and take a few deep breaths. You're doing well here. We've got a little bit to go here. But cultural diversity is a fascinating trend. And you may be thinking, is this relevant for a South Australia regional area? And I've seen the data, you've seen the data. Is this relevant? I absolutely think it is. This is where our country is growing through net overseas migration. In Australia, we have 1 in 4 Australians who was born overseas. Or if you look at the next level of the generation up, 1 in 2 Australians has a parent born overseas. And where is this growth coming from? It used to be a European migration trend in those 60s, 70s. We're in a century of Asian growth at the moment. So England still is the number 1 country of birth here in Australia, but India has overtaken China, and we've also got our friends across the ditch in New Zealand that are contributing to our population growth here in Australia. But the largest growing communities in Australia, leading in this last 5-year intercensal period, is India, Nepalese, the Philippines, Chinese, as well as Vietnamese. Can really see that strength of that Indian growth as well. And so I think it's important to recognise the communities, the cultures that are going to be approaching you over the years and decades to come. This is a key part of preparing your effective communication, your effective engagement with the changing face of Australia. Now, when it comes to cultural diversity, I think this is probably an area as a pale white male myself that I've learnt a lot and seen a lot of things that I wish I had interacted differently. And I grew up as a Gen Y, shaped significantly, and each generation has major world events that shape their generation. And for me in 2001, it was the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And as a boy from Sydney and living in the sort of around the Parramatta area, we had plenty of cultural diversity in our community, but the way we treated a young refugee from the Middle East during that period is not something I'm proud of. What happened in our school playground, what happened globally we didn't have the cultural intelligence at that time to respond appropriately. And I really hope as a nation we can continue to lift that cultural intelligence. And I think it's just an area we've got to learn in. Learning how to interact with people from different cultures. I've just had to learn how to drive a different car. I learned how to drive an electric vehicle. I had to YouTube it. I didn't know how to turn the car on. I genuinely could not turn the car on. Couldn't get the thing moving. So we've got to learn cultural intelligence, just like interacting with different people, different technology. This is a way I think Australians really do need to grow. And I say that not judgment. For me as a person, I'm trying to learn and grow in that cultural intelligence. Learning how to interact with my Indian neighbours who spent 3 years in lockdowns and couldn't get home to see their families. Learning what their story was and learning the joy it was when they could board a flight for the first time and reconnect, not just with the grandparents. It's a community they were part of back in India, a village they'd been raised in, cousins and friends and family, and the celebrations they got to reconnect in. It was so powerful. And so I love what our Indian people bring to Australian community. They get community. They absolutely get it. I'll move on. I like that topic. But looking at number 6, the long-term health conditions. This was a new census question from 2021. And it asked Australians, have you had a long-term health condition? And 1 in 3 Australians have at least one long-term health condition. That's 8 million Australians. And when you look by the sort of age groupings, the 0 to 14-year-olds, asthma is the top condition for those young children and early teenagers, for younger families and older families, those 15 to 34 and 35 to 64, the top challenge is mental health conditions. We've got 1 in 5 Australians in the last 12 months who have had a mental health condition, challenge with anxiety or depression, and many of the different conditions they might have experienced. 2 in 5 Australians have at some point in their life experienced a mental health condition. This is a part of the Australian story. It's part of our psyche, and it's something we need to consider, particularly as we look to the benefits of nature and community, and yet we're living more and more in isolated homes. We have the declining number of people per homes. I thought that might go up after the last census, but it's coming slowly down at 2.5 people per dwelling. So how do we build community for people who more and more live alone? We've got 1 in 5 Australians that lives on their own. The older generation have challenges with arthritis is the top long-term health condition. And so with an ageing population, how do we build that connectivity to services, to health, to care, to community for an ageing population that is challenging challenged with arthritis? And finally, the last area is around mobility. Now, I haven't got the sort of interstate movements, but the way I want to kind of have a look at mobility is really around the jobs, which is affecting where we live. And so for today's young Gen Z, with an average tenure of 2 years and 9 months in their job, which is the Australian average job tenure, less than 3 years, it's forecast they're going to have 18 different jobs across their career in 6 different industries. You might be in your head doing the tally. How many different jobs have you had? How many different industries have you worked in? Maybe you've been one of those fortunate people that found your lane in a couple of decades, or you've had that one job for life. But for a young generation, they're anticipating a lot of movement, and I think the traditional pathways to work have really changed. It used to be sort of a two-pathway approach. You might go down that trades and do the apprenticeship approach, or you might head to a uni and get that qualification and head into a career. And today's journey to work looks a bit more like this. It's online learning, internship, gap year, casual work, gig economy, a side hustle. We've got 1 in 3 Gen Zs that has their own entrepreneurial job, own business. They've got the digital advantage of being able to run just about a whole business off their device. They're a generation that have a great skill set. And interestingly, their skill set's going to be, I think for teachers, it's going to be a challenge, because 65% of these children entering primary school today will end up working in jobs that don't even exist yet. I wonder if we've got any social media managers in the room. 15 years ago, that job didn't exist. And for young primary children today, the jobs that they're heading into as renewable consultants or solar optimization specialist, these jobs of the future, or a space tourism agent. I'm hopeful to join that career path if that opens up. These are the opportunities today's young children will be heading into, and it's so important that, again, I get to speak to a lot of parents and teachers, and I love using this next slide, and I hope even just for you as a parent or grandparent, you find this next slide really helpful. And it's a slide that's outlining what are the key literacies that we should be embedding, not just in today's children, but I think into our workforce as well. What do we want to see people good at? We want to see them great in literacy, numeracy, yes, good, given. Science, the STEM approach, ICT, that tech, that digital literacy, digital intelligence. That was something we all kind of were forced to adopt during those online meetings, that we've all learnt how to find the close and mute button on Zoom and stop screen sharing, blur the background quick. We've all found those buttons, we've learnt those skills. But then you've got financial literacy as well as cultural literacy. I would add there that under that is that cultural intelligence is part of that one. Then we've got the competencies. What do we need to do to be able to solve some of the real challenging issues facing humanity, not just here in Australia, but globally? We've got a global population, so we're going to need critical thinking, we're going to need creativity, communication, collaboration. And finally, what are those character qualities as well? We're going to need to see things like curiosity or persistence and grit. My 9-year-old daughter asked me a few weeks ago, she said, "Dad, what was it like when you grew up in a lockdown?" I said, "Honey, we didn't have a lockdown when I was a kid. You've lived through that as a young 7-year-old. You've learnt what it's like to deal with unknown volatility, with uncertainty, with change. Learning how to collect rat tests and bring them home from school. They've learnt how to deal with so many different things that I never had to deal with as a kid." So the character qualities of things like leadership or social, cultural awareness are great traits that we're going to see emerging, not just in our young generation, but across all the generations. Now, as leaders here today, I love this quote from Mark McCrindle. He said, "The success of a leader is measured not by what they achieve in their tenure, but by what they set in motion." As I mentioned today, the young children will live to the next turn of the century. The work that we're beginning today will carry on for decades into the future. And I know you're thinking, well, how can I grow your town, your region, your area? I wonder where that key stat lines up for you today, how you can unlock an opportunity. Is it around that attraction to an area? Is it about the retention of people, celebrating the strengths of your region, connecting with the hearts, the hopes, the dreams, the fears of people, and really finding those opportunities? And I hope you've enjoyed the stats on the infographic. It is available digitally if you want to get a copy of that so you can share it with your teams. It's been a real privilege to be with you today, and I hope this data gives you confidence, because I know you're making big decisions. I often have a little bit of fear and trembling when I see the number of zeros on things like investment projects based on the data that we're providing and supplying, the multi-billion-dollar decisions that are coming off this data. And I really hope the data gives you confidence. Continue to add to that your experience, your leadership, your collaboration. There's so much wisdom in this room, and it's a great opportunity today to be with you to share. So thank you very much for listening. It's been a real privilege. Thank you. Hand back to Mike for some questions.
Thanks. Thank you for that, Geoff. Do you want to just...
I'll grab that, absolutely.
Yep.
You can leave it there and I'll take it home, but you might. Now, do we have any questions from the floor? We have roving microphones down the front. I'll start the ball rolling. No, we have a gentleman over here. Perhaps if you can state your name, and Geoff will do his best.
Hi. Pardon my voice. I've got rather bad sinus from hay fever. David Singe from the Regional Development Adelaide Board. You had up there looking back to look forwards. As a, amongst other things, geography and history graduate, I appreciate the history bit. In South Australia, the era of Playford for 26 years set the state up essentially as a low-income, low-cost economy. And if you look at it now, the rate of migration inward is perhaps influenced, I think empirically, by people in other states thinking, well, it's a much lower salary, but they don't look beyond that. They don't look beyond that overall affordability. Do you do disposable income analysis to be able to compare the states?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not something I've looked into as a lens to see where there's opportunity, and I think that disposable income would be interesting, knowing that you've got a higher mortgage stress in some of those East Coast cities, or a higher rental stress where more of your income, even if you're earning more, it's just going into the banks or into your landlord. So it'd be a good way to look at the data around spending by household to see where there actually is surplus, if any, and where that disposable income is advantaged. And I think at different life stages, that's going to be a key part of that as well, where there's certainly more pressures in those family forming years. And I don't know if it necessarily gets easier as you get older. It sounds like grandparents are just adding on to their list of paying not just for their kids' education, but now paying for their grandchildren's education as well, more and more doing that. Great observation. I think it's something absolutely look into.
There's a question up the back, Geoff, just while we ask with that one, just a question from me. We talk about the greatest area of growth is in the Gen Alpha. Does that then lend that if we're going to see a skyrocketing growth over the next 10 or 15 years, there will be a skyrocketing demand for housing that is already built out in metropolitan Adelaide? So that is just a gift for the regions, that it will get the benefit whatever happens?
Yeah, I think absolutely, housing is going to be one of those key stories. I think that isn't going to go away. I don't think there's going to be in 12 months, yep, we've resolved that. And so thinking generationally for housing is probably one of the opportunities I think that would really be one of my key drums to bang, that I think we've got an opportunity as a region here in South Australia to explore how do you prepare not just for, there's 560,000 new people in the last 12 months. Okay, think about that for every 12 months for the next 25 years. 500,000 more people. And
Geoff, the beauty of that obviously is that you've got plenty of time to plan to get to that point.
Absolutely. And I think Australia's growth, we're going to see that opportunity for unlocking the regions with people who've seen the benefits, and particularly while places like Sydney and Melbourne do receive a large proportion, I think it's about 80% of new migrants start in Sydney or Melbourne. But these cities are a victim of their own success. They're congested, they're busy, they're expensive, and they do have some great cultural and lifestyle as global cities. But Adelaide's a global city. You've got that right here, and let alone unlocking and creating new cities built from the internet up to prepare for future generations. I think it's a great opportunity.
Thanks, Geoff. A question down the back, I think we had. Are they still there? Scotty.
Scott McKay from Regional Development, Far North. Thanks very much, Geoff. Just probably put you on the spot here a bit. Just looking at the combined effect of some of those incredible trends that you've outlined for us, particularly work from anywhere, the technology, the mobility and the affordability. McCrindle doing any work to look at the coincidence of effect on regional demographics of those trends? Because some of those trends have only been around for a short time.
I think, the anecdotal conversations, even last night, just hearing about younger families moving to the regions, knowing there's an opportunity to get maybe that essential worker job, but also bring in a remote work job into that area as well. And so I think that'll be one of the fascinating things. And unfortunately, the census data around people who work from home got completely skewed as sort of 5 million Melbourne residents were in lockdown, and they'll probably tick that box saying, yep, I work from home all the time, but that's not the reality. And so to understand that shift will take a few years, I think, to see how the regions respond. And I get asked over and over again, are people going to just move back to the cities once they've had a year or two of it? But I think for those who rent, maybe they'll move back. But for those who buy, I think there's something about Australians, when they commit to something, they're going to see it through. And we know from some of the home ownership data that if you own a home outright, you're going to, on average, live there for 18 years. If you own it with a mortgage, it's 7 years. Whereas if you're renting, that average tenure is about 18 months. So I think that place where people have bought into the area, literally, will make a difference in terms of their commitment to the area. And that's one of the things I think we'll see regions continuing to grow as affordability. And that's one of those data points that will be worth continuing to check into years to come, how that home ownership in your area hopefully is a great story of commitment to your area.
Yes, gentleman here, and then the lady here.
Rolf Binder, Chair, RDA, Barossa, Gawler, Light, Adelaide Plains. Thank you for an amazing presentation. 2 quick questions, which probably need a long answer. Firstly, why is South Australia generally the oldest age group? And secondly, why is South Australia the slowest growing?
Yeah, good. I'd say it's that 4 decades of losing young generation that pushes up your median age, and that opportunity to attract overseas migrants and even international students as well is one of the opportunities to continue to change that dynamic. I remember the first question, why is it the slowest growing? I think that's one of the questions that can be explored. How do you want to change that? What appetite, what preparation for growth into the future? So good questions. I'll let you figure that one out through the day though, I think.
Yeah, hello Geoff, thanks for your presentation. I'm Sue Chase from Regional Development Eyre Peninsula, and it's probably more a comment rather than a question, but one of the things we found over there, if people are moving to the region either as retirees from interstate or working from homers, and that is great, but the trouble is they don't provide a workforce in the area, and yet they're creating demand.
Yes,
so
more
our
service.
challenge is how do we meet that demand?
It's a good observation. I'll leave it there. I'm not sure how to answer that in the last few seconds on the clock here, but it's a good question. We'll let that permeate, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of discussions around meeting the service demand.
And our lucky last down the front.
Thank you. Barbara Derham from Whaler, but representing Cornerstone Alliance today. As you would all know that Whaler is going to boom, how do we get professional people, example, doctors, professional people in all walks of life, to regional cities across South Australia, if not Australia?
Great question. I think the attraction and certainly the skills shortage has been the big topic around every industry, police, teaching, health, trying to think where can we secure great professionals. I think the overseas migration is one response to that. I think and Australians are looking for more than money. It's not just to pay them or offer the bigger. I think there's that story to tell. I think it's about unlocking the narrative in your area, finding what are those great celebration moments, those great stories that resonate with people, telling those stories and helping people see the opportunity and finding those opportunities with people who might have moved back. If there's 4 decades of people who've moved from South Australia who had a great childhood, how about we find those 4 decades of people and help them learn about that boomerang generation where they can come back and be a blessing back into the state that they were privileged to grow up in. I wonder if there's any legs on that, but that might be another question to explore through the day. I know that's been a question I've been asked a few times over the last couple of years, and certainly the health sector is really feeling that pinch, so certainly some opportunity to explore some global solutions I think would be the thing that Australia is a limited pool of talent, so how do we find that? And we've got the global population epicentre on our doorstep. If you draw a circle around China, India, the Philippines, Indonesia, more people live inside that circle than outside it across the planet. So we're in the right population epicentre of the world, and it's really just about unlocking that talent, finding that global story that we're a part of.
Ladies and gentlemen, please thank Geoff Brailey for an excellent presentation.